So now that we know that we're on, welcome, and welcome to those who have arrived on Bere Island very recently, and welcome to all of you who are joining us from around the world on the webcast. So this evening I'd like to begin with a talk, and then we'll move straight into discussion and questions, and then we'll end with meditation. Somebody, I think it was Santayana, who said that truth is only believed when someone has invented it well. We need to express the truth. We need to find a form of describing it, what's the matter? No? A form of describing it, a way of presenting it. And yet, the experience of the truth itself takes us beyond the story that carries it. But this week we're focusing intensely on the story of the last days, the last hours, in fact, of Jesus, and how the different Gospels communicate the truth of Jesus, the truth that Jesus is, and the truth that Jesus conveys, how that is carried over to us through our contemplation of the story. When we know the truth, when we feel that we are in touch with it, that we feel that we have recognized it and accepted it, it may disturb us, it may force us to change our way of behavior or change our beliefs or opinions. We may have to say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. So the truth is something that in itself disturbs our assumptions and our previous patterns of perception. And the truth is always about connection. It connects us through the higher imagination to something that is beyond imagination and beyond anything that we can conceptualize as well. In a great story, the sort of story that remains deeply embedded in us and we never forget, like this story, we experience an imaginative leap. We go beyond what we could expect into something that makes sense, but makes sense at another level of reality, another level of consciousness altogether. This is what happens in a great poem. In a great poem, we see an imaginative leap, a connection between things that we wouldn't normally think of as being related to each other. And the parables of Jesus are poems in this way. They use very simple imagery, like a seed growing in the ground, or a father reclaiming or regaining his lost son, and so on. These very simple stories that make a huge imaginative leap. And what we see here is the use of imagination, very different from what we normally think of as fantasy. In the literary world, the great writers, the great thinkers, the great poets are operating at this higher level of imagination, very different from our usual level of soap operas and stories that we tell, stories that we consume in order to amuse ourselves, entertain ourselves, or distract ourselves. So you don't binge, as you would in a Netflix series on the higher imagination. Higher imagination is sparer. and more economical and more confident and shorter. And it's not exploiting us either. It's not feeding our fantasy or stimulating our fantasy. But it works, nevertheless, at a higher level of creative imagination. Sometimes you see this in a newspaper. I was reading a newspaper the other day, and I read the editorial. It was rather heavy-going and complicated. And then I looked at the cartoon, the political cartoon of the day, and the cartoon said it all. It communicated, a much sharper truth and window of truth than the editorial was able to do. So, and this bears on our experience of meditation. When we meditate, we know that we let go of not only concepts, our ideas, our opinions, even our beliefs. We don't trounce them, we don't trash them, but we let go of them. We're not focusing on them, we're not using them, we're not analyzing them. So we let go of our thoughts, our beliefs, but also of our imagination. John Main said somewhere that imagination is the great enemy of prayer, and that shocks some people because they think that imagination is a part of prayer. And of course, there are forms of prayer which do use the imagination, and that's what we're using when we read the story of Jesus in these last days. We are entertaining images, not so much concepts, but a story told in a very almost cartoon-like way, or a higher level of simple images, and sometimes with vivid detail, like Peter talking with the serving girl in the firelight at that moment when the truth hit him between the eyes that he had denied Jesus. So sometimes the story is very vivid like that, sometimes it seems to jump ahead, to be very compressed, almost telegram type style. But the story is conveyed through images, and to read it, to be nurtured and inspired by it, we need to use that higher imagination to read and process these images. And of course, in order to do that, we have to focus. We have to pay attention. That's what Lectio Divina is, the spiritual reading of Scripture. We're not only reading this story with our rational minds or our historical information or our analytical apparatus. We're reading it with the heart. Now, those other ways of reading it may be useful. Comparing the different texts, trying to put it into a historical perspective, understanding the historical reality that Jesus was in, and so on. All of that can be useful, but it's of a secondary nature. The really important work that we do as we read and discuss this story is that we pay attention to it wholeheartedly, that we read it with that higher level of imagination. There's a story, I think it's Borges, I think it's called Funes. It's about a young man who he's thrown off a horse, suffers a head injury, and as a result of it, he's unable to forget anything. His mind is just continually filling up with ideas, images, thoughts, all the sensations of the world around him. And it's rather a bit like the internet. Imagine being thrown into the internet without Google, without any kind of search engine. You're just dropped into this ocean of data and this continuous rising tide of information. So anyway, this poor character is suffering from this condition, and so he can't think anymore, really. He can't focus at all. So in order to focus, in order to pay attention, we have to have this quality of being able to forget. The Cloud of Unknowing says, this little 14th century book on meditation says that we pierce into the cloud of unknowing by the repetition of our mantra. That pierces and takes us into the cloud of unknowing, and we drop everything that we do know, all the information we have, all the fantasy that we are processing, all the worries, anxieties and plans that we have, we drop all of those into what he calls the cloud of forgetting. That's what the Desert Fathers meant by saying we lay aside our thoughts. They said prayer is the laying aside of thoughts. And it's in that sense that we should understand John Main's comment about the imagination as the great enemy of prayer. He's speaking about a particular kind of prayer. In fact, it's the kind of prayer that the desert monks assume to be the essential prayer. So when you read about prayer in the Desert Fathers, they nearly always refer to the prayer of the heart, or what they called pure prayer. Pure because it has begun the process, at least, of taking us into that place of unknowing, to that place where we lay aside thoughts, or into that emptiness or poverty of spirit that we were talking about this morning. So we need to lay aside thoughts in order to make space for insight. And it's through insight that we really touch the truth, or the truth touches us. There's a difference between ideas and insights. I think we live with this all the time. You do a PowerPoint presentation, you try to communicate a certain number of ideas. You usually link those ideas to images because images are easier to remember than abstract ideas. So, but those ideas very quickly overlaid by the next PowerPoint presentation you see, or the next book you read, or the next YouTube video that you watch. So ideas are very quickly pasted over each other. And we forget ideas. It was, somebody came up to me the other day and said, "Thank you very much, Laurence, that was a really good talk." And then I realized they couldn't remember anything of what I'd said. So, and I've done the same. You know, after a while, you stop absorbing the flow of ideas. So, the truth, on the other hand, comes into our experience through insight. And an insight is an encounter with the truth that lies behind the idea or the image. And it takes you by surprise. And it has a physical impact on you. When you get an insight, you feel it physically. It's like a little tremor. It could be a big electric shock going through you. Or certainly some kind of physical perception or physical response. So this is the kind of prayer that the Desert Fathers, John Main, is talking about. It's the kind of prayer that we practice in meditation. We open ourselves to this experience of the truth that comes through insight and that touches our whole being, including the body and the mind. So this doesn't mean, however, that our minds are not meant to be imaginative. It means at the time of meditation, we lay aside thoughts, words, and images. We lay them aside, not by repressing them or suppressing them, but simply by returning to the mantra gently and faithfully. And as a result of that, and there's a lot of brain research that gives illustrations of this, as a result of that regular practice of meditation in your daily life, we find that actually our mind works better. That the prefrontal cortex, which is the CEO of our brain, that allows us to make decisions and come to good judgments, that works better. That's more awake, more alive. And so, in a sense, it's the laying aside of thoughts that allows our thoughts to become more clear and accurate, less prejudiced, less inflated by our ego or hijacked by our ego or our desires or our fears. We see things more as they really are, and therefore we're able to make better judgments, even if those are painful ones. And also, I would say, we come closer, even in the thoughts and images that we use in ordinary life and ordinary conversation, we come closer to that higher imagination. Okay, so we're actually closer to the truth, to that experience of the truth, even in these more ordinary ways of thinking and communicating. I think this has an important bearing upon, every aspect of life, not only our personal lives, but our lives as citizens, our life in society, and the institutions that we are part of or that influence us. If we lack this higher imagination, we very easily become brainwashed. It's very easy for stronger forces than we may be to take us over, and we only have to see what happened in the areas in communist societies or in Nazi Germany, communism, Nazism, and I don't know, you might almost say Trumpism, clearly working, very persuasively, very, very persuasively. So what does allow us to be so easily taken in, so easily hijacked, so easily made to believe in things that are self-contradictory and dangerous and absurd? We see what we want to see, and we allow ourselves to be deceived because we do not make the truly imaginative connections with the truth. Our higher imagination is not operating, is not working as it should. And so, when things go wrong in society, or when we make, even in our personal lives, serious mistakes, maybe you marry the wrong person, quite a serious mistake, or you, you make wrong investment, or you follow a career that, because pressure is put on you and you're out of touch with what you really want. So when we make serious mistakes, we may come to recognize them as mistakes and as failures of the imagination. Somebody once called violence a a failure of the imagination. We only descend into violence because we can't see anything else to do, any other way of responding to people we disagree with or people we don't like. So, and as I was saying today, on Holy Saturday we'll be fast forwarding through the history of redemption. And after creation, the first big thing is the fall. The fall into what? The fall into duality that happened in the Garden of Eden, that happens when we come out of the euroboric state of childhood or infancy, when the ego begins to develop and we see that we are separate even from what is closest to us, our mother, our family. So that's perhaps what the fall of Adam and Eve really means. It's not so much a sin as growing up and entering into the painful world of duality, of separateness, of otherness. The real fall into sin happens with the first act of violence. And that was a failure, you could say, also not only of the imagination, it's clearly a delusion on Cain's part, despite the fact that God had given him a warning, God intervened, he heard the truth spoken to him. You are about to make a big mistake, God said to him. Sin is waiting at the door ready to pounce, but there is still time for you to master it, God says, in Cain's higher imagination. There's this moment of self-awareness that he knows that what he's doing is going to be a serious mistake. But he fails. He fails the call to self-transcendence. He fails the capacity of the higher imagination to change our direction, our way of behavior. So, we need this quality of higher imagination to read the story and to allow its meanings to present themselves to us. We could say, one of the themes certainly of this part of the story where we still are, which is the arrest of Jesus, the betrayal, his arrest, and then his trial. Okay, we've come so far in the story. Very clearly, a main theme of this section is the truth. What is truth? The word crisis, and Jesus is in a crisis in his life. We all know what a crisis is. A crisis is a moment in which everything becomes highlighted, vivid, and yet at the same time you are not in control of it. You don't know which way it's going to turn. And managing a crisis, being calm in the middle of a crisis, is something we would all like to be able to do. Jesus does seem to be very centered, very calm, very much himself. He seems to have overcome or integrated the fear that quite naturally made him tremble and sweat when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane. The fear of suffering, the fear of death, the fear of abandonment. These are all fears that create a crisis, and they can become a crisis in our lives. So Jesus seems to be very centered as he goes, to be managing the crisis. But that doesn't mean to say he's controlling it. He's just centered as he goes through it. The word crisis in Greek means judgment. The truth becomes conscious when we make the right judgments and when we embrace it, whether it is painful or easy to do. This theme of truth becomes quite explicit, actually, in this part of the story, in the conversation or the dialogue between Jesus and Pontius Pilate. We know from historical records in Rome that Pontius Pilate, who was the governor of that part of the Roman Empire, had to deal with two major Jewish rebellions, and he had been criticized in Rome, in the Senate, for the way he handled them. So he was politically in a difficult position. And that may help us to understand, maybe that was something that the readers of the first readers of the Gospels remembered or knew. So what happens is the Jewish leaders, in the story, come to Pilate pretending to be loyal to Caesar, the Roman emperor. Now, he knows perfectly well that they hate the Romans and they hate Caesar. But they come to him, and this is their pretense. So we immediately see the truth has gone out of the window. This is politics now. And what do they want? They want Pilate to do the dirty work for them, to get rid of this troublesome Galilean prophet, who doesn't seem to have been particularly political, but who they claim was an enemy of the Romans, an enemy of Caesar, and telling people not to pay their Roman taxes and so on. So Jesus is presented by them to Caesar, the consummate politician, as a political rebel. So Caesar obviously knows what's going on. He can't stand these colonials either, but he has to examine this unfortunate criminal or this unfortunate person. And clearly, in the course of the dialogue between them, Caesar comes to the conclusion that Jesus is not somebody who deserves to be executed. And he says, I can find no fault in this man. He questioned Jesus, and clearly he wasn't converted. He didn't become a disciple of Jesus, but he could see no fault in him. He was harmless. He was just a religious, fanatic, probably. But no doubt he was impressed by that centeredness, that calmness, that self-possession that Jesus shows in the story. Then we're told that the authorities, the Jewish authorities, come back and they're determined to force his hand, and they put him into a position which he can't politically get out of. And the Gospel says Pilate was more afraid than ever. He was more afraid than ever. He was really cornered. On the one hand, they were threatening a rebellion, another riot, which wouldn't have looked good in his reports back to Rome. Or, on the other hand, he had to comply with what he felt was an unjust treatment of an innocent, harmless individual. And then he asks Jesus, who he is, what is he here for? And Jesus says, I have come to bear witness to the truth. And that leads then to Pilate's famous reply, truth? What is truth? Well, if you've watched House of Cards, that doesn't come as a big surprise, does it? So what is Pilate, a sophisticated Roman governor, what is he aware of? He's been around the empire. He knows there are lots of different religions, lots of different philosophies. The religion of Rome is more of a state religion, more of an official state church. Just do the rituals, do them properly, keep the status quo, keep social stability. It's not about the truth. Religion isn't about the truth. Religion is about keeping people in their place, protecting those who have power from those who don't have power. So Pilate knows that the truth is a very ambiguous concept. What's true to one person is false to another person. That the world is a place full of diversity and multiplicity of creeds and beliefs. So, what is truth? And in some ways, I think he's a very modern person. We face also today a modern dilemma about choice. The Dalai Lama is a major spiritual force and teacher, continually advises people to stay in their own tradition, their own religious tradition. No tradition is perfect, and he recommends people to stay in their own tradition, even if it's imperfect, and to get to the heart of it, to find the truth at the heart of your own tradition. But then he always says, however, you're free to change if you want to. And that's the modern dilemma. So how can we be free to choose what is the truth for us? And that we can, and we have to some degree today, but it puts us into one of the characteristic anxieties of the modern world, which is the anxiety that comes simply from having so many choices. When we have so many choices, we immediately begin to get confused. It also raises for us, I think, the question of multiple belonging. People often ask, can I belong to more than one tradition? Or there's more than one way to, skin a cat. There's more than one way of climbing up the mountain to the peak of the mountain where truth is found. So, can I follow different ways? Somebody once asked the Dalai Lama, can I be a Buddhist and a Christian at the same time? And his reply, I thought, was amazing. He said, yes, at the beginning. Yeah. So I think, Pilate's question is very relevant to us. And although he's not a very admirable political figure, and we see him washing his hands at the end of the story, and that's become a universal symbol of avoiding the crisis, avoiding the judgment, avoiding the decision that you have to make. If you want to know the truth, you've got to make a commitment. You have to, something in you has to consent to the truth. Not only a question of working it out, or calculating it, but something in you has to find through that experience of insight and give your consent to it. So, but nevertheless, Pilate is a very sympathetic character in a way, one that we can identify with as modern people. And even that fear of commitment, which is also a characteristic of our culture today. We don't think of our lives in terms of permanent commitment. We've understood how commitment can evolve, how it can change. So what does commitment mean when we know so much about our own psychology and when we have so much freedom of choice, so many options? What does commitment really mean? So, so I think truth is really at the heart of this story. Certainly at this point of the story, it becomes very explicit. This question, what is truth? And Jesus saying that he has come to bear witness to the truth. The word witness is the literal translation of the word martyr from the Greek. So to bear witness is to lay down your life for the truth. And perhaps the only test of whether we have been touched by the truth is whether we are prepared to give ourselves wholeheartedly to it in whatever way that may demand. I think this is where meditation comes in, somewhat to our rescue in this modern dilemma, this skepticism, this difficulty we have with commitment, the dilemma of choice, and this confusion about multiple identity or multiple belonging. I think meditation in a way cuts through that. It promotes the reign of truth, the kingdom of truth, mainly perhaps because it makes us humble. The first fruit of meditation, however you approach it, whether you approach it as a spiritual practice, as a way of prayer, or whether you approach it as a scientifically authenticated method of reducing your blood pressure, your cholesterol, and your stress levels. But I think if you actually enter into the practice, into the experience that meditation opens up, the inevitable result will be that you grow or break through into self-knowledge, self-awareness. Perhaps it begins just with self-awareness. You become aware of how you are living, interacting, behaving. You become aware of your environment, of the way people are responding to you. Simple awareness. You're just turning up the voltage, or turning up the light in the room. And then with that comes another level of truth, and that is self-knowledge. Not based upon information you have about yourself, not just psychological awareness, but an actual experience, a being experience of who you are. I was saying yesterday about the levels of silence that we pass through in the work of attention, the silence of the tongue, the silence of the whole body, sitting still, and then the silence of the mind, and then the silence of silence. itself. So these are levels. This is part of a journey we are making. In this process, we will become more aware of our strengths, of our weaknesses, of our bad habits, and also of our potential. All of this just comes about quite naturally. You don't have to pay for it. You just have to enter into a regular practice that allows this seed to grow. As to take that example, that parable of Jesus. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who took a seed and planted it in the ground. He went to bed at night, he got up in the morning, and all the time the seed was growing. How he did not know. So here's the cloud of unknowing. How he did not know. Even though you might be doing brain imaging or checking your blood pressure or trying to measure, observing the measurable effects of meditation, and most people don't do that, but if you were on a research project you might. But even if you were, the actual seed of self-knowledge would be growing in a way you could not observe. This is at the quantum level of your being, where the minute you start to observe it, it changes. Because you've changed the conditions under which it is working. The minute you become self-analytical, self-conscious, self-observing, then you're out of it. You're not in that zone anymore. So the seed grows, how we do not know, in the depth of our being, but it produces fruit, according to this parable. And it produces signs of growth, just as we see around us here on Bere Island this time of the year, things growing up, breaking into bloom, or into green anyway. So we see the signs, but we still don't understand fully what is happening. What I think this points out to us and convinces us of eventually is that we all have an innate capacity for truth. Because it's the truth that is now working in us. We are discovering what truth is, and it's not what we think. It's not what we imagine. It's not what we conceptualize. It's not what we can predict or control. Nevertheless, we are touching and being touched by the truth in this deep, silent, unobservable part of our being where it grows. Where does this innate capacity for truth come from? In the Bible it says that the human being is created in the image and likeness of God. The Buddhists believe that we all, human beings, have Buddha nature. We have this capacity for pure mind, for pure consciousness. St. Augustine thought that the Trinity, that the life of the dynamic life of God as understood in the Christian vision, this communion of love, this community of love that is God, not an abstract concept, but a personal sort of volcano of love, really, that this Trinity is present within the very structure of human nature. So our capacity for the truth is best understood, perhaps, as the fact that we're made this way. We are made in such a way, our minds, our bodies, every aspect of us works towards the truth, resonates with the truth, is most comfortable with the truth, where we feel we are true to ourselves when we are in the truth, and we are being untrue to ourselves and therefore uncomfortable with ourselves, and in conflict with ourselves and divided against ourselves when we reject the truth. We have this capacity for delusion, for self-delusion, for denial, but we also have the capacity to turn around, to come back to ourselves, to come back to the truth. Good. I always think that's kind of verified by the trust we put in a complete stranger when we stop the car and ask them for directions. Why should we be so confident that they will tell us, to the best of their ability, which isn't usually very much, what is the best way for us to go? Sometimes they struggle. Sometimes they won't admit that they don't know. But generally speaking, overwhelmingly, we assume that people will tell us the truth and be truthful with us. If all other things being equal, that's what they can do, and it's not going to hurt them to do it. And that may be a little insight into human nature. So, would anyone like to share any reflections, either from the readings of the story, or from your walks around the island, or any questions you'd like to raise?
Hey, I was thinking more about the question I had asked you earlier about the look, that Jesus gave Peter, and how did you know that the look was of love, of acceptance? Because I never thought of it like that before. But when I was running, I went for a run, I was really thinking about it, and the one thought that came to my mind is it would be totally out of character for Jesus, like it would be totally against who he was, So that was why, it wouldn't have been in his character to have been mean to
Yes,
Peter.
yes.
Yeah.
I think that's right, yes. We all believe in justice, forgiveness, and, generosity of spirit, until somebody, puts us to the test, and somebody acts badly, or betrays us, lies to us, really annoys us. And then it's very difficult for us, to let go of it, to try to forgive. It's very difficult. So what we see, but we know we should, at least, I think, if we follow the values and the insights of the gospel. These are our values, these are our insights, this is how we think we should live. We should be forgiving people, we should be just, we should promote peace, we should try to reconcile people who are divided. Those are our values, but they're tested to the limit, very quickly. So what we see in that story then, as you describe it, is that actually Jesus had totally integrated his own teaching. He was his teaching, and there was no gap really between what he said, what he taught, what he believed, and who he was.
It's hard because I'm very aware of the times that I don't do that, and I think meditation has helped me, but I think it makes it hard, because it's like, how could someone, be that loving, that forgiving, when someone is betraying them so personally,
So how do you think he is then? Where does that come from?
Um,
So how does he do it then?
I think it's, kind of like, when you mentioned one of the tapes I listened to you when John the Baptist said, there goes the Lamb of God, and two disciples started following Jesus, and Jesus became aware of them, and he said, "What are you looking for?" And then they asked him, "Where do you dwell?" I think it's where he dwells. That's how he's able to be loving truly in a situation that I think most people objectively would find that hard. So it's his dwelling.
Yeah, that's very good. Where he's dwelling, and it's who he is. I mean, he's in touch. He's totally in touch with his true self, isn't he? His true nature. And if meditation helps us a little better to embody and live those values and those beliefs, it's surely because meditation helps us to see the difference between our false self, the forces that pull us in the opposite direction, and our true self, which is grounded and rooted in the truth of these values. So meditation helps us be ourselves more.
So if dwelling is the place that comes from meditation or through practice of prayer, I still don't get how he has the will to reach that, and I can't see that Jesus has almost reached a state of that one would seek through prayer and through meditation, but the will to keep tackling that in the face of the reality of life and a lot of loss of hope and all of the huge challenges that life really throws, or society does, or especially mistruth and all of that. And I still don't quite get how Jesus often feels like a bit of an end point, where he's dwelling there. But I don't know how I still don't get quite where he gets the will to reach that place. Or where we
I met somebody who told me that they had stopped meditating because they were going through a very difficult, tense time at work, and they were laying people off, and there was a lot of politics and suspicion and competition, and the atmosphere was so bad, so toxic, and so dangerous, that he said, I was feeling relatively calm and peaceful, in the midst of all of this, and then I felt, my God, somebody's going to knife me in the back because I'm so nice. I'm just being too nice about it. And I better stop meditating. And it reminded me later of a doctor, an older doctor, in a group of doctors I was speaking to once, about meditation, and he said he was quite skeptical, but anyway, the point he raised was, he said, I think it could be dangerous to meditate in my work, because he said it would make me too compassionate. And I suppose what he meant was that the boundaries would dissolve, that he would get over-involved and so wouldn't have the right detachment, professional detachment. In the first case, the guy in the toxic working conditions told me he went, after a couple of weeks, he went back to meditation. He just thought his way through it. I think he said something like, when I was meditating, I didn't really know what it was doing for me. I didn't know I was meditating. But as soon as I stopped meditating, I knew I was missing something. I started again. So, and then I don't know what happened to the older doctor there, whether he, how he dealt with that fear of becoming too compassionate. But it must be something in us that presents us with a choice, this sort of crisis, judgment. And there are moments, aren't there, where you know it's not just an abstract choice, it's not a preference almost, it's not a casual option. It's quite a serious question of integrity in you. Do I go this way? Do I go that way? And if you know that to make one choice is going to take you further away from that true self, and it's going to take you into division and a sense of untruthfulness, you're not going to want to go that way. You're prepared to go the right way, even though it may be dangerous. And I think what we see in Jesus in the story is clearly he has this orientation of his being, he's made this choice, or the choice has been made in him. And he's quite prepared for what may be the price of that choice, which is going to be a big price for him. So it brings into the picture this question of sacrifice, really, or the gift of self, really, that is at the heart of human integrity. But you do?
Laurence, could I develop an alternative imaginative view of the look, the glance?
Yes.
Jesus was fully human as well as being God,
Hmm.
and we know that he had flares of anger. He was impatient. He told off his disciples. He was tired. And I think it might have been something you said in your Lenten reflection today or yesterday about, was it you or was it me reading somewhere, about making him a super person?
Mm.
That really he's above all this and he's just floating through it.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas he's a human being, and Paul emphasises that, and yes, he's without sin. And my alternative imagined view is that he's really upset and disappointed with Peter, and that what he, and again, not seeing him as the person who foresees everything that happens, but as a person who anticipates that, look, Peter, you said this, but my guess is that by tomorrow you would have let me down, and it actually comes to pass. It actually comes to pass. And I think we need to be careful about attributing this superhuman quality to Jesus. And yes, and I take your point about integrity. He's a man of integrity and consistency. But he's also human. He was under a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, as you pointed out, just hours or minutes before he's in the Garden of Gethsemane, I think we have to, my alternative imaginative view is we must allow him to be fully human. And allow ourselves to accept the real suffering that he underwent, so that in a way, as Paul said, we can identify with him in our own suffering, so that it's not as if, well, we're suffering, we're down in the dumps, we've reacted the wrong way. Jesus is up there on a pedestal, he wouldn't do this. But perhaps he did, not in a sinful way, but also not in a perfect way. That's the alternative,
Sure.
imaginative view of the look.
Yes. No, thank you. No. Well, we'll have to wait and see. The only comment I would make is that I don't think it would be superhuman of him to have looked with compassion at Peter, knowing what Peter had done, what Peter must be feeling. You know, there's great detachment in Jesus at this point, but he's not cut off. But that detachment does give you a not superhuman, but I mean, I would say the best human response.
Yeah.
But maybe there was a flash of "told you so," and then the compassion came after that. Who knows? Who knows? Yeah. Anyway, there's a lot in the look. So.
Yeah.
Right. So.
This is from Tim from Valley Shannon, Ireland. Why is the truth so elusive sometimes?
Why is the truth so elusive sometimes? I think it's because we think it is abstract, whereas the truth is, we experience the truth, and we experience it in an embodied way, and in a psychological way, and in an emotional way, and in a intellectual way as well. But it's embodied, and sometimes we treat the truth as if it were an answer, the right answer to a complex question. Whereas the truth is really the whole thing. It's the whole situation, which includes us, the context, the subjective element, the objective element, other people's element. It's the whole picture embodied. But sometimes it's just very difficult to put into words, and that's also why, fiction or myth, or the way this gospel story is written, it's very selective. Clearly, this isn't a transcript like a court transcript. It's an imaginative communication of events. So it's very difficult to express the truth of anything in a literal way or in a reductionistic way. And that's why even great scientific discoveries are often made as breakthroughs, not by reductionism or by analysis, but by a moment of higher imagination where you see the whole picture, or the scientist suddenly sees everything coming together.
Yeah, I wanted to come back to what you replied to Ollie's question, and you mentioned this person who stopped meditating because he was in a particularly difficult situation professionally, and he felt he was becoming too weak. I have one or two people in the meditation group in Brussels who are experiencing great personal difficulties in their lives, and they have confided in me. Don't know why, but they did. And when they come back on Monday evening for meditation, they say, "Oh, Fritz, I really couldn't meditate this week because there's all these difficulties that I have. I just managed to sit down for 10 minutes at the odd moment. And as I'm not a counsellor or a psychologist, I couldn't really reply to their personal difficulties. But at the end of the conversation, I said to them, it's probably like this: when you feel least like meditating because of these difficulties, you just can't concentrate. You probably need it most. And then afterwards, when I walked home, I said to myself, this answer was a little bit too easy, a little bit too obvious. Was this really useful to the person? When you feel least like meditating, you need it most. I mean, we all have these moments when we find it difficult to meditate because we've had a very hard day at work and problems are just coming into our heads all the time. And then it's difficult to meditate. It's true. But is it true that, I mean, was this the right reply to people who are experiencing difficulties which stop them from meditating regularly?
Well, I think it's always good to base your response in your own experience, rather than just presenting the party line, as it were, or the ideal scenario of you should meditate twice a day, half an hour in the morning, half an hour in the evening. I mean, I think there is something liberating, and it's a gift to people to share that tradition, that invitation to a discipline, because many people are looking for that discipline. So I don't think we should sort of fail to do that. On the other hand, I think we have to say this may well take you a long time, where you will almost inevitably meditate, stop, learn from the experience of stopping. That will bring you back and try again. So you will be jumping on and off the bus. And then you'll realize that when you're meditating, you're on the bus and it's taking you further. So your own experience is going to teach you, but it will take time for all of us for that experience to build up. There are people who get it instantaneously. And, as often not even religious people. I had a Marine in my class, ex-Marine in my class, and he said to me, "I don't have a religious bone in my body," but he was obedient to what he thought was my order. I said to them at the beginning of the class, "I want you to meditate twice a day, 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening." He did it. Now, he's a very disciplined person, physically fit, mentally fit, and a very intelligent and actually very sensitive person. So that gave him the opportunity to learn what meditation meant, what it is, from his own experience. Now, if you don't have the experience, or much of it, the experience isn't going to teach you. So, but most of us, and I certainly didn't start like that, so most of us, get dragged, kicking and screaming, and giving up and so on. So, but I think it's very important to relate the ideal, if you like, or the invitation to realities in your own experience, and if you share from your own experience, that's much more helpful to someone. So I think it's you never know when your articulation of the truth is going to say it, is going to communicate anything. Most of the time, it doesn't. But occasionally, it hits the target, moving target, in the right way at the right time. And so you could say something like, actually, when you're feeling really that meditation is useless, and you're too worried or you're too agitated to meditate, that actually is a very good time to meditate. Now, that is true, and I think you have, many of us here have experienced that you can sit down to meditate with your head in a complete fog, and you're maybe a high level of anger or anxiety or fear, and by the end of the meditation, you have cleared that. You've dropped it, or it has dropped. Now that doesn't necessarily happen every time, but you know that it is possible, and that's a great teaching that you give to yourself when you realize that you can be in this state of mind which seems hopeless, helpless, and desperate, and yet you can change it, or it is changeable by this very simple practice. That's a tremendous thing to discover, and a tremendous freedom, because it makes you realize that you are not the victim of your moods or your states of mind. That these moods and states of mind, we know that they're changing anyway, but of course when you're stuck in a very powerful negative state of mind, you find it difficult to believe that it can change, or that you can step back from it and take a distance. So, but sometimes, saying that without putting a guilt trip on someone, or making them feel a failure, saying that can be very helpful. I mean, I think the really useful thing about how we can share this gift with each other, and that's what community is, really, sharing it with each other and with others, is to deal with the feeling of failure. And nobody likes failure, and yet failure is inevitable. You won't learn anything without failing. And so, but we don't like to admit failure. We don't put it down on our CVs, I worked at this job for 2 years and it was a complete, total failure. And the references people gave me were completely fake. They just wanted to get rid of me. So, you don't put that down on your CV. So we don't like failure, but we learn from failure. And if we're honest with ourselves, we can grow through failure. And if you think of this week, it looks pretty much like a failure from one perspective. Jesus ends on the garbage dump of Jerusalem, and he's alone, deserted, and his life and teaching in tatters. He's a failure. So I think we can help each other to deal with that just a disappointing feeling of failure, and turn it around into something that is going to teach us reality, realism, and humility. Good. Well, let's take our time for meditation.